was in is back in, so they stuck around. Thank you very much for sticking around. Okay, ready to begin.
Okay. So this is our first presentation. The board during goal setting talked about wanting to have more presentation about curriculum and data. So Amy Parkinson is our director of curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Works closely with teams in your schools. She has two pieces of information to share with you tonight. One is some assessment data, and the other is the material selection. We've been talking about that. All of the Library media specialists in the SAU have been working on this for about a year. So Amy's going to review their work with you and give her data presentation. So that's some handouts. Color. It's easier to look at data in color. So yeah. Yeah. I got mine with.
When did you turn around?
Oh, look at you. I did.
So they could, none of me. Amy, I have the camera on facing you.
Oh, thanks.
Yes. Fortunately, we can't.
I'm good. Oh, do you need one of these?
I have one thing. Well, yeah, then I'll take one. No, thanks. I'm just gonna turn back around for a minute.
So hi, Amy. Nice to meet you. Yeah, so I've been working with your team. So when we get to the last section with like some of my recommendations, I actually started working with some of them already. Okay. Let's go, guys, because they were really excited to get started. So in general, what I did for you is I gathered up some of your assessment data from the last year or so, and then some of the data is actually from prior. If you have looked at the, maybe it'll work. Okay. There we go.
Yeah, it might be a little clunky.
If you look on the SAU website, there is a link on the curriculum page that goes to a data dashboard that has all the data for your district. A lot of the stuff from here is in there. It also links over to your iReady account information, just so you can have it. But I thought it would be helpful to just come and talk a little bit about how iReady breaks down the data, and then a couple trends we're seeing with the SAS data. So we'll start with iReady. Your iReady data, opposite way. Okay. It comes in a couple different ways. So when we pull the data, we can look at the beginning of the year view, the view of where they should be for their grade, and then we can look at the view of where they could be potentially on the state testing. That is brand new. It just opened up at the very end of last year. So we have not really seen enough to know if that's a valid indicator of state testing yet. But we are looking forward to seeing a couple more trends come in and see if it matches up. But the first one is actually, it's the beginning of the year data from this fall. So where your students are based on where they should be at the beginning of the year. So if they're green, they're like good to go there where they're supposed to be on average or they're above. If they're yellow, they're a little bit behind, but definitely catch up, and they may catch up without much intervention at all. They may need a little bit of extra help. And then red are the students who are generally going to need more help getting caught up for the school year. So overall, your numbers are good. They match where we're going.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Questions?
No, go ahead.
And I think this is from the whole school, not a particular grade or anything.
Correct.
And sorry, I am fairly new to standardized testing. Is this from a standardized test?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is from your iReady testing. So iReady, we implemented it last year SAU-wide from K to 9. We pulled it back from 9th grade this year, so it's K-8. However, it's done in all the schools in the SAU. And what it does is it assesses the students 3 times a year in math and in reading. And what it does is it says, here are some questions. How are you doing on them? It's a computer-based test. And then says, hey, you got all those right. Let's move you forward to a more difficult question. And it keeps adjusting its levels until it can figure out exactly where a student is.
We do not start K until the winter benchmark.
I have not heard of this.
No.
Yeah, in the fall we do a organic benchmark, or where we look at kids what the letters they know, the sounds they have, and right. In the winter, which is January, we will do K.
Because we like to get them. It is computer based, and we like to make sure that all the students that the computer part is not what they're being tested on.
Right.
That they know how to use the mouse and they know how to press the buttons and do all of that, so that we're not holding them back on that. Because there's nothing worse than knowing a kid knows something and knowing that the test itself is what's broken. Spoiler alert, we're going to talk about that when we get to the science test.
Mhm. In the kindergarten, we have touchscreen Chromebooks too,
Yeah.
because not all the kids can use a trackpad or a mouse, so we have touchscreen for kindergarten and first grade.
So the fall assessment is going to give us a couple things. So the first one, this is just your general overall placement for the fall, where we're going, like where they are beginning. Reading sources, keep looking through, and this is why I gave you a color version, is because it's a little bit easier to see. Beginning of the year, are the students where they're supposed to be according to their peers across the country? And yes, this is good. Sometimes you would have a little bit less green, but you guys, dude, your phonological awareness there is like through the chart. Like, nice job.
Isn't phonics something too that, some kids get and some kids don't?
It's
So
a
that's
tricky
kind of
thing.
That's a tricky test.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the fact that they're there, it says a lot. It's also one of the few tests, and you'll see this when you look at like where the students are for the end of the year score, where they just don't assess them after a certain grade. So once a student has tested out of the phonics, the computer just says, no, they got this. We're all set. So reading, we're doing well. There's some areas that we generally need to work on, and this is a recommendation for later on. Usually it's that comprehension. That's across the board. So that's tricky. It takes a lot, and it's one of those skills that sometimes the development takes a while.
At what grade does that? Can't begin at kindergarten? No.
It does. Yep. So they start looking at their ability to read and understand stories and listen to stories and understand them in kindergarten, and both true stories and fictional stories. So it's pretty impressive how it does it. The system also, one of the things I like about it is that partway through, it gives them little breaks, and they get to play little games that are both strengthening their skills but are also really fun. And some of the skills they're strengthening are things like how to use your touchpad or your mouse. Like you have to stack caps. And some of them are, hey, here's a game on having a pizza parlor. That's my personal favorite.
Sorry, can I just ask another broad question? So this is iReady. I assume this is like a New Hampshire Department of Ed
Approved.
product or approved product?
It is an approved product. It is not from the New Hampshire Department of Education, but it does count as an approved product and can be used to qualify our dyslexia screening.
Oh.
So that is a nice little treat. We are transitioning in that across the state for different parts. We're still using some of the old screeners just because this is so new
Right.
to us.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, how do we know sort of what percentage of the state is using it, or just so we have comparative data,
So we do not-
Is it new?
It's been around
Okay.
for a while. And in fact, they have full curriculum programs. They have a lot of stuff. It's a large company.
Got it.
But it is one of those situations where the norms data, the numbers are huge that they're
Right.
comparing it against.
But it's not statewide.
No, it is not statewide. The SAS is statewide and a required test. This is something we have chosen to support our students. Keep going. It does test the same things though.
Or the alternatives would be like star testing or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and the STAR testing, especially as you get into older grades, I was a high school teacher for a long time. The students memorized the answers to the STAR testing, so it was kind of hilarious because they would go in and be like, "Oh, I know the answer to this one," and they would just click the button, and you're like, "Well, that's not a good assessment." Math. So our beginning of the year stuff, it's still looking pretty good. There are areas that are less strong across the board. State testing, school testing, all of it. Geometry and that algebraic thinking. So again, this correlates pretty closely to that comprehension. So a lot of the algebraic thinking stuff. And geometry is a struggle. Pretty common though, but not, we're not in alarming points. So the next set of data looks much worse. And that's why I put it twice. I put it in the second part. but only because this is where your students are in the fall based on where we would expect them to be in the spring of that year. So if we gave them this test, like their end of the year test now, where would they score? And so, yeah, this one grade level below, which is yellow, well, that's to be expected because they are almost an entire one grade below. And the tests take out part in like September, early
It's almost
October.
like a pre-test.
It is like a pretest.
Yeah.
So we could use this data next year and compare it to their post-test. And that's what their growth scores are. So if you look at any of the data things that we talk about, growth scores, that's what it's judging it on.
Do we have the spring test from last year?
Yes, we do. So, and all that's on the data dashboard, like everything is on there, so you can see all the going back and the growth scores and everything they did.
When we're talking about, if you look as far as being like 3 or more grade levels below,
Mhm.
which is like, looks like for reading is 9%.
Mhm.
I mean, that's pretty high, isn't it? Or is that not high if you consider it's all the way from K to 8?
So it's K to 8, and it's
So it might
It
be
is
like
1 to
10
8,
10
but-
kids.
it could not be like not a lot of kids, but also this is also going to include all students. So all students took the assessment. So students who are working at a much lower level
Yeah.
due to needs are falling under this one too.
You mean like identified students?
Like
who
identified
have-
students who have reading struggles,
Okay. But it wouldn't be an adapted test or something, it would be the same test.
it keeps them at the level. It's the same test and it adapts to them as they go. And we provide supports like read aloud and all of that.
Okay,
but-
modified.
We modify it, but it doesn't have like a full accommodations within the test. So things that by the end of the year, like high frequency words, yeah, I mean, if you look around the school, there are words everywhere. Like there are things written everywhere in this school, tons of stuff. You can see why their high frequency words are really high. Phonics, phonological awareness, grades not assessed. This is literally like, do they recognize their alphabet? And then letters come together to make words. So once they get to a certain age, they're like,
Yeah, you got it.
we're not even going to ask you a question. You know that that's the letter A. Literature comprehension, literature, there are all that. But again, this is end of the year based on their fall. Like they're doing well on that. We can see where we want to work, and that's what specialists will use, and like some of the groups will use to focus their work. Math, not quite as great. Who keeps going the other way? But still, like, so what they tell you in the training is that anyone who is up to about like this like a little bit into the pink section, right? So this like 2 grade levels below, all of those people are going to be fine. Those kids are fine. We'll catch them up if they're a little bit behind. It's this part that they're concerned on. But still, like we can see that, okay, geometry. Let's look a little bit more geometry. How are we doing geometry? What are we doing with geometry for like littles? I think sometimes it's a scary word, and in reality, it shapes. Algebraic thinking. My biggest pet peeve was always not just calling it algebra for like littles. 1 apple plus 1 apple equals 2 apples. No, 1 cow plus how many cows equals 3 cows. That's just algebra. That's all that is. You're just using different words. So working on that algebraic thinking. And when you work on algebraic thinking and you work on the comprehension from the lit, it's all intertwined.
So can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So when you do the testing in the fall, and then you're doing this testing so you know where they need to be, this is all individual data that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm assuming then that this is used for like the wind placements and things like that, or if they need a little extra help or they're behind or.
Yep, and as the year goes on, the next wave of testing is like January into the very beginning of February. What's going to happen is it will start showing each student has like a report with like graphing where they are, where they're going, where we would expect them to be, have they met that goal, all of those kind of things. So we can then reassess groups, look at supports that are happening, celebrate all their successes. We can do all of that.
We're always looking at this data during PLCs.
Mm-hmm.
This is where our reading and math specialists and interventionists, this is the area that they're focusing in on. So
Do you have PLCs that are just those people, or are your PLCs broad, like a, broad group of people or? are you
We have
putting those
PLC,
people together?
every grade level has a PLC
So you're
meeting.
doing PLCs of like people, not, like when we did them in our school, like, there might be a guidance counselor, there'd be an administrator, there might be a middle school, an elementary. So
Mm-mm, No,
the-
it's grade level, yeah, so,
you've got 'em
so if
that
it's
are-
second grade, we're meeting with the second grade
Yeah.
teachers, some, often the
Right.
para educators might join us, the,
So you're working on
administration
issues that are
for that.
directly related to what they're doing.
Correct.
And one of the interesting things for this school is also that, as we were talking about at the last Co-Brown board meeting, Co-Brown is also using iReady. So the data follows the students, so it is possible to like look at student work along the way.
And Concord is not.
Concord is not. However, they are getting more schools pretty quickly, so we'll see where it goes. All right, the next section is like a lot of data. So it's something that, like, it's a nice thing to sit around Christmas Eve, have a little data read, wait for Santa, have some snacks. In general, what this is, and this is on the data dashboard where you can then take it, expand it, make it bigger, do all of that stuff. But it is your assessment data broken down by grades from the state assessment. So the top one is your most recent set of scores. The bottom one goes back to 2015. Some disclaimers in this data that you should know. From 2014 to like around 2018, 2019, this was all a different test. It was a different test. Then we had a year with no testing. And then we started up with the new test. So the 2018-2019 is kind of a transition year with the testing, but the test was different. We used to have an SBAC, and now we have the New Hampshire SAS. So they test generally the same thing, but in reality, we've seen there's a bit more, and we've seen this just in testing in general, a lot more expectations for analytical work. So
Which one, the older one or the newer one?
The newer one. So you cannot just memorize a bunch of stuff anymore and do really well on the test. Pretty much all assessment has moved in that direction. You need to be able to do critical thinking, analyze, all of that. Whereas before, like back in the day, I know back when I took the test, all you had to do was memorize certain things and you would be fine. So we are expecting a lot more from our students. Let's go away. So third grade, it's tricky. It's the first year. I don't think it likes me, Kristen.
Yeah, the clicker is connected to the hard drive over there.
Fourth grade, okay. Fifth grade, about the same. 6, 7, and 8. So, especially in math, this is very common. That in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, you start getting some changes. Your sound scores are actually pretty strong compared. Nice job. 8th grade, you will get an anomaly in 8th grade. It's pretty common. You'll notice like the scores are generally much worse. Like it's not just because it's like 8th grade, right? Part of it is
Why are we doing this? It's not important.
Mhm.
I don't care.
100%.
It's dumb. Am I
Yes.
gonna be graded on it?
Mhm.
Yeah, I've heard them all.
yes.
Mhm.
There's a lot of
Spoken from an
social
8th grade
aspect-
teacher over here.
Yeah, there's a lot of
I taught 7th and 8th grade.
And
All
there's a
right.
lot of social aspect to it where you're like, okay. And we encourage them as much as we can to do their best and do their important stuff, but they are 7th and 8th grade. We see the same thing with 11th graders. Like I used to be the 11th grade tester. Yep.
Is this the spring test or the fall test?
This is the spring test. This is spring for the state.
Oh, right, it's only once during the SAS is
Yes.
only once during it's in the spring.
Yeah. And so, I mean, these 8th graders are done by the time they get, like, mentally they're done.
Mhm. Mhm.
Could you speak a little bit, though, if we go back to like looking at, say, 4th and
Yeah.
5th grade, well, I don't know. It's still pretty high because both the red and the yellow are
Mhm.
saying that they are not proficient, right?
Yeah.
And so you're talking about like a 35%, and that's like a third of our kids
Yeah.
saying that they're not proficient. Could you just maybe speak a little to that?
Sure. So, one, generally, we are about on par. And there's, if you look on the last page, you don't have it because you didn't have the. Hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
I added one extra page. I put in the assessment proficiency over time comparison because it's come out from the state.
have that one either.
I know, 'cause it just came out.
Earlier.
So that kind of compares where we are at compared with the rest of the state overall. Like our proficiency versus the bottom, if you look at it.
Oh.
With the exception of us dropping below on science this past year, you guys have been pretty much above it, but it's still not great. So your school does not have as much of a problem. Like this past year was not an issue with it, but we do have some issues with participation rate. So in the state of New Hampshire, it is allowed to opt out of a test. Parents will opt out. Student does not take it. Okay. The state, however, deems every opt-out as an opt-out no matter what. So we are still held accountable for those students not taking the test. So if we ever drop below 95% like participation rate, everything below 95% will be a 0. Like every continuing thing. You only have one where it's like a 94 participation rate. That was science.
I'm not understanding what you're saying.
So participation. So if you have 100 students who take a test.
Yeah.
And 95 of them take the test. In the state of New Hampshire, all their test scores count. Very good job. We're really proud of you. Once you start doing, like if you have, of that 100 students, 10 students opt out, you've dropped down to 90%. The 5% that's difference between 90 and 95% participation will count as a 0. They won't count as like, oh no, only 90 kids took your test, so we're going to take your
So
percentage
they're
out of
still
90.
in the percentage, so then it looks like it's less than it really is.
Yeah.
I was wondering
No,
how
no,
that
no,
affected with, I was wondering how the testing, because that's been a question I have. You know, a lot of people are proponents of getting your kids to opt out of the testing, and I was wondering how it affected the school testing when they do that.
It does not, it has not here, like in this past year, it did not.
Okay.
By much. Like the science is like 1%. And as a whole, Deerfield is very high, like participation rate compared to the state average, because the state average can drop down. Like science, I think one section was like 66%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you saying that the 34% score that you're showing here in our district last year in the science test, which is below the state average, could be because of the incorporation of zeros
Not
because students aren't taking the test?
Not for you guys.
Not for us.
For some of the other schools, yes and no, because there's only 1% difference.
But if we
It's-
get to a
it's low.
point where we're close, sort of, we have so many students that are opting out, then it could be that our
You
percent of proficient could be then
You could.
lowered by zeros of people who are not taking it.
You could, yes.
Gotcha.
And you'll notice like there's like the 8th graders disproportionately outweigh like this, like there's back and forth. There's only 2 groups to take the science.
Yeah.
Only the 5th graders and the 8th graders. And we already know the 8th grade doesn't really like to take tests. Get it? There's a social thing, so getting that incorporation back in about like how important it is.
That's right, science is just 5th and 8th
Yes.
grade, whereas the others we're looking at every.
Math, the other difference is that when it comes to English language arts and math, those tests for SAS are pretty long. A lot of the science tests are not very long. They're shorter.
Do they still do the, they used to have like an experiment, they'd give them materials. and they had to
Uh-huh.
do this or
Yeah,
that.
so those are part of it, and I'm like some of the like the digital version of it, like, and so it's tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
But
But as you can see, like if for the state, our average is 36%. Like I do question some of the validity, like the test itself. Like that's really low. So what's going on? I can tell you what we've done in response to it.
Yeah.
But in response, and this is on the last page, so the key takeaways. One of my recommendations was to look at earth science and motion standards, because those are the ones that historically have been the worst. I can go back data-wise and look. Your science department, I met with the science folks a couple weeks ago. We looked at their standards and we looked at like their curriculum and what they're teaching. And they have some ideas about the competencies, making the standards align with NGSS, which is the national science standards that most schools like all line up with. And ours do line up, it's just a little bit of a wording situation. But they are heavily invested in really looking at their curriculum and moving forward with some potential suggestions for changes in this next wave. And they've already started to work on like some of this to make sure that this stuff is getting incorporated into it.
I know that science instruction too it's very different for a lot of newer teachers coming in and teaching. It's not the same as teaching. Like they get a lot of support on how to teach literacy and how to teach math in the universities, and they get very little in science. And I know because I used to teach the class, and they gave me 6 weeks to teach them how to teach science. So it would be nice. I mean, I'm just wondering about the support that they're getting. I know we used, when I was here, we used to try to do a lot to try to help the teachers on how to teach critically and how to come up with the units and get them to think about it and how to make it, fun. I mean, science is, I'm sorry, but I'm very prejudiced, and science is the most fun subject, right?
I love it.
So, but you really need support in learning it. And also a lot of people have huge science misconceptions, especially like forces and interactions. There's a lot of misconceptions there. Earth systems, a lot of misconceptions there. And we really need to work with the teachers to make sure that they know those misconceptions.
Yes. So yeah, that is the work that they're doing. And there is a team at the meeting, and I met with them again. And I met with them and like we kind of structured what we want to do. And I also hooked them up with some contacts from some of the other schools, and before I left, I was talking to Greg, but also like getting communication about like how we're teaching science in the classroom. And sometimes it's just a re-examination of what we're doing, like really just looking at it.
On the state test, because I think it has changed some since I even left teaching, as far as identified students taking the test, are they?
Yes. In order to not take a test as an identified student, you have to fall within the level of like what we call DLMs. So they used to be called the portfolio system. Even those are still assessments. It's just done alternatively. It's not done through the SAS. How the SAS does it is you can put in accommodations and for it. They are generally limited. They're mostly time-based,
Right.
and sometimes reading aloud and like having a scribe.
Right.
But for the most part, it's everyone.
So I remember like the reading section, you couldn't read it to them.
Correct.
So even if they had,
Right.
even
Which
if
is
they
testing
were
their science
identified,
knowledge.
right, we're testing reading, but if you have a child who reading is their area, yet you can't help them
Yes.
with it.
Which they've modified some of that.
Yes,
So it's a
right.
little bit better. And one of the things that's nice about iReady is that it can read the test
Right.
to the students as they are taking
Right.
it.
Yeah.
As just a general accommodation. And I think that one of the benefits of that company and that organization as a whole is that they recognize that accommodations for one student can benefit all students.
Right.
So why not try to get the most out of it for our kids?
Yeah, we're trying to actually test knowledge
Correct.
versus reading.
Correct, not your ability to read, like see it on the screen. Do you know the science part?
The other thing, and just again from my own teaching experience as far as science, when I first started teaching, we had a lot of time to teach science and social studies. Remember when we went to science camp, other schools were like in awe with the amount of time we had during the day to teach during the week. As my years came to an end, there was less time to focus on science because more focus was put on other things. So it's difficult to get in everything that needs to be taught when you don't have the time during the week to do it too. And for me, I loved teaching science, so I would like to make sure that we're giving the teachers the time to teach what they need to teach too in that area.
You see that in the measurement and data. Like there's a measurement like category in iReady, and you can see where students start taking science as like a separate standalone because all of a sudden their measurement scores go way up. So like, there's your evidence. Like that's a good idea. We should be doing this. So yeah. So recommendations, like I said, the science, we started working on it. Increased focus on comprehension skills. I was talking with some of the interventionists, some of the support staff. We are working on that. You also have some like cool programs that is getting focused on. And then that need to focus on a little increasing geometry. And sometimes it's as simple as identifying it as geometry and moving forward and just incorporating it in. We use big scary words in math sometimes, and math is one of the few areas where, hey, thank you. Where they come back and they're like, hey, wait, I don't do math, and people feel okay with saying, I don't do math. You would never say like, I can't read, but you're okay with saying I can't do math. And like that's just a cultural shift in how we approach some of these things. But yeah, I'll have the new data for you as soon as it gets reorganized once you take the testing. I just put them onto your system so your kids will be good to go when you come back from vacation.
Yep, and the teams are ready. We've talked about that at PLCs, the next round of benchmarks and.
So do parents get the data for their child
Mhm.
specifically?
In the fall, they are given it in November during parent-teacher conferences. Some grades were not clear that that's what they were supposed to do, so we've tried to fix that piece. Some will be sending the fall data along with the winter benchmark data, so that the parents have that information, and then we'll send it in the spring as well.
And each progressive one for the school year will incorporate the data from before, so you'll be able to fill a cute little chart. So, and for the teachers, from our point of view, it also provides us the ability to go in for any student and say, what does this student need to work on? And not only tell us what they need to work on, but give resources, like free resources available from it, or just like, here's a whole bunch of things that you could work on with this student. Here are some groups that you could put this student in based on their ability. It really does a lot of that stuff and helps out. We use some of those things because we like to have a more hands-on approach to putting kids into groups, but it's nice to have those little benefits.
Yeah. And I assume not, but are the resources available to parents? Or like if a parent sees a particular concerning result, could they reach out to the teacher and say, I'm concerned about their geometry comprehension. Can you provide me some resources that we can work on?
Yep, and oftentimes we direct them to our math website, because it's many people don't know how it is filled with rich information and games to play, and it's an amazing resource. And for reading, the reading specialists are working on increasing an online presence with that kind of information as well. So,
Awesome.
but yes, teachers will be able to provide that for parents and guardians.
I mean, that'd be a fun thing to do with science too. We could have some really easy experiments that they could do at home that are geared toward what the units are that they have. Parents would do. I had one student, his two brothers, and he went home after everything I did and did it at home. So then when I had his brother the next year, he's like, oh yeah, I remember when Nate brought that home.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, very helpful.
I'll go data and I'll update it and make sure. Okay, so we'll switch gears a little bit. So I have a few this one. So this is coming from.
Thank you.
If you need it. It was in your packet, so you might have it. I was not sure.
I'll take another.
Oh, yes, it is in the packet, but thank you. I saw your email too late. I'm sorry.
Okay,
I was so quick to respond to the first one and then,
We're good. So this is so for the past year and a little bit, the library media specialists have been working on trying to update and revise the material selection policy. And this is their proposal that they are going to put forward on it. What they did is they talked to their colleagues, they went online, they went to a whole bunch of different schools and saw what they had done with their proposal. And they kind of took it, looked at it and said, well, we're not too far off, but here's where we want to just clarify some items and go through. And they just wanted to make it a little bit more user-friendly. So they made a huge, nice little selection for purpose of policy. And it just outlines who's responsible for what, where the ultimate decision lies. You'll notice that they put things in the school district so that we can just fill it in when it's time. And then they also included the appendix documents, which are like, okay, if you were interested in a reconsideration of a book that has been chosen for the school, this is the procedure that we'd like you to follow. Please answer these questions. These are pretty much the ones you will find on any school website at this point for the policy. And then on the last page is their ratings form. So we get that, we go through it, the team decides, look at how we're gonna judge. It also gives them the template of how they will be looking at books and materials coming into the school in general. So,
I think the one thing I wanted to ask about, I like this.
Mhm.
The one thing I'm concerned about is it's 35 days the book can be on in the classroom or in the library before a decision is made. It needs to be pulled. And I was wondering if there could be anything, I mean, is it, I would assume that if it was something you thought was very controversial, you just pull it and not wait for 35 days. But I just wondering if that should be added in the policy just to make some, at the discretion of the principal or something. Because if I was a parent and I thought there was a book that was, I mean, I understand we're doing it because we don't want everybody to control what is in our libraries because we feel that they're there for a specific learning purpose. But I'm just concerned about if it's something that's, I mean, I don't expect it to be, but we just had that issue recently. That wasn't something you want still on the shelves for 35 days. So that's why I'm bringing that up.
now the plan for this is exec board.
It went to exec board
Yeah.
and now it's going to all the individual boards. Yeah. Because the exec board can approve it for the SAU, but each individual district has to also approve it.
And can each individual board make changes, or would that have to go back to the exec board?
We can make changes. The request from all the library media specialists is to have one standard policy throughout the SAU. Yeah.
Why?
Hmm?
Why is that the goal?
Well, it had to do with consistency, just in general for the SAU, especially since it's going to go to, part of it involves the superintendents. So making sure that everything's aligned more closely.
Do you know why
So
30?
then-
Oh, sorry.
So then if the policy committee on our board has questions about some of the details in here, what would you like the procedure for that to be?
They had not specified what specifically that they would like, but they wanted to talk about.
So I could just get them back to you
Mhm.
and you're in touch with the committee.
And I'm in touch
then?
with the committee.
And then if there were any changes that would need to be made at the request of a board, then the whole body would need to meet again and then go through the exec board and then come back to the school
It doesn't have to
board?
go back to the exec board. Ultimately, you make the decision for your Deerfield School District
Yeah.
policies.
Right.
This group got together and they're excited about it and they worked really hard and they think, oh, this would be great if we could all have the same policy. Whether that happens or not that's at each board's discretion.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
And I believe that the 35 days came from, they weren't explicitly clear about this, but I believe it came from looking at the other schools and what their policy is. And just in a general, how long it's going to be, but under the understanding that if something's
Yeah, I just feel like that's
That's
not
coming
in
up.
here, that's
Yes.
why I have that concern.
Yes.
As a parent, if I was reading this, I would just be concerned, it's gonna be there for 35 days? Yeah, I made a decision that quickly.
It refers to the school library bill of rights and the appendix. Which appendix? Is that on the file that's in, this is on page 3. Is that on the file? Can I find that somewhere or?
Well,
Or did I not
you
get the
should be
whole?
able to, no, you should have. I did not include it in my copy either, this last one.
I wonder if I saw it online. So there's
It was
something-
online.
I think it is online.
I think it is, but
Awesome.
But I just want to commend them on doing, I think, I like this, I like that they have an actual form, and it's got the, how exactly it's going to be done, like the deadline and stuff, so.
and they worked really hard and put a lot of thought into it because it's been an ongoing process for a while. So they really wanted to make sure they were addressing the needs of the community, addressing the interest in providing for our own students and our own children, and also a more a consistent look across the state and the SAU and
And I also like that you put in the respective review sources in here. That's very helpful for a teacher to use that.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so we'll put it on your agenda. for first reading next time? Was it on for first reading? I can't remember if we already had it on there.
It was,
Yeah,
but we didn't have.
We
it.
didn't do anything, yeah.
So it'll be first reading next time, or should we go to second reading next time?
I can't remember if we moved everything to second. You can keep it on there
Did
as
we
long as you
move
want.
anything?
I don't remember.
I don't remember.
So yeah, you don't ever have to approve it if you're not ready, so
Right.
keep it on there.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I'll reach out to them about
That-
any questions.
Yeah, okay, awesome. Thanks,
I
Amy.
do think this draft was requested by people who emailed us in advance of the meeting.
Yes,
can we just
so
send
forward
this
that,
out?
yep, that's right. Thank you for reminding me.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Okay, we will move on to the default budget approval. Welcome, Amber.
Thank you.
Long time no see. Since yesterday.
Not even 24 hours.
Okay, so we have approved the operating budget bottom line. We have not yet approved the default budget line. So anyone who was here last year probably recalls that there were questions about the default budget calculations, and there was an article about it in the Dooryard Gazette. So we did take a closer look at the default and our calculations. So we did make some adjustments here, and we invited Amber to sort of share how the methodology for calculating the default budget. So,
Sure.
Thanks for joining.
Oh, no problem. So when you open your packet, the default budget is over to the right. It's the second to last column. But before I get there, I just want to kind of go through our process of how how I developed the default budget. So just like with when we create a regular budget, we start from zero and kind of build up. This is a little bit different in the fact that we have to take the prior year into consideration, because a default budget is last year's expenditures plus or minus one-time expenses, plus any contractual items. So, but I still approach it like I do an operating, because I still go line by line to see what everything is.
Can I just clarify something?
Sure.
So you said last year's expenditures.
Mm-hmm.
Is it last year's? That's different than a budget actual, right? So like
Correct. It's
Okay.
last year's budgeted, not what actually
budgeted
occurred.
expenditures.
Budgeted. Yep.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify because that's.
So for instance, like we'll take like general supplies. If we budgeted 5,000, and I would then look at that line to say, okay, in that 5,000, was there anything in there that you would only purchase one time? Or is that more generalized, like your paper, your pencils, your everyday materials? In Kristen says, yeah, it's paper materials. And then I also had to buy this, but I'm not going to need it next year because it was a one-time thing. I would subtract that out of it. I would only include the generalized materials, something that would carry from year to year. Anything that's a one-time thing would be subtracted out. That's why when you go through the lines, you may see in the supply lines, it's not going to exactly match the default because there are things that are one-time expenses. So I go through every single line. I determine, okay, is this a line that could have a potential one-time expense? I put together a spreadsheet that I send to Miss Withy, who then goes through the spreadsheet and says, okay, in this line, these are the things I purchased. Okay, yep, I had this thing that I only needed last year. We're not going to purchase it again. I then subtract it out. Or if it was one, or it could be something like she says, okay, I know we need to create, I know we need to cut some lines to try to lower the budget at the end. This is what I typically spend because this is really what we need, but I need to find some money somewhere to cut. Those aren't things that I would cut from a default budget, because those are things that we would typically need, but we just have to make cuts somewhere. So you shouldn't lose your everyday items just because you have to make a cut. Does that make sense? So some of the things that need to be included are anything that's contractual, like a CBA, that's included. Any other types of contracts that are voted by the public. So transportation is included because it is mandatory by law. Special ed is included because it is mandatory by law. So there are some items that are, that are mandatory and some items that are not. So I go through line by line to determine what is a one-time expense, what is contractual, and what is mandatory by law. Those are the items. So I know there's been discussion over the last couple years in regards to the default budget. I had gone through several conferences, workshops. I've spoken with our council on multiple occasions, and that's has been the guidance in the past. With that said, I know there was a lot of chatter last year. So over the summer and a little bit into the fall, I looked out at some more documentation, also received some additional guidance to see if there was any methodology changes. And from the guidance I previously received, there was some. So when I went through the very first time I created the budget, I had taken a lot of those items already into consideration. So the changes you're going to see this evening are minimal because I had already taken those. The reason why you're seeing some changes tonight is because we've investigated a little bit further. There was an article, as Kendra has mentioned, that was posted. So I took a look at what was in that article to see if any of that aligned with the different methodologies that needed to take place. So that was my approach. So I did come up with a spreadsheet that you have in front of you. There's three boxes. The first box that's in blue is the comparative default for 24-25 compared to our 25-26 default. That was our first proposed. So when I gave you the budget back on, I think it was like November 4th was your first version. That was where it was on the first version. In the very middle where it's like a pinkish red color, that is my second version. Okay, so the areas that are on here that I looked a little further into were some positions that are not covered by a CBA, are contractual in the sense where they might be a multi-year agreement, but are not part of a CBA. So when we budget for those, if they're not in the middle of a contract, we always budget those at the end of the budget. And then once the year comes, it gets billed out into their actual salary line. So I took a look at those. The other things you'll see on here, some of these items were items that were listed in that article, so I paid special attention to those. Co-curricular officials was on there, custodial salaries, substitute salaries, secretary salaries, those types of things. The other section was utilities. Now, utilities, there is a lot of differences. It's probably, I think, one of the most challenging areas because I think there is different levels of guidance. One document will say one thing, another document will say another thing, and legal counsel might say something slightly different. So from the guidance I received, utilities are necessary for an adequate education. So you will see that I have kept the utilities in, where somebody else may have taken them out from a document that they may have read. What I will say is there is some guidance that is out there that is currently under litigation. So they're still battling whether they think it should or shouldn't. If you put all the BAs in the same room, I will guarantee that we all do it slightly different. So that was one of the areas I think I found most challenging. There was some items under facilities that I took a look at, which was ground maintenance. And then one of the other things that has been, I would say, one of the guidance I received several years ago was in regards to if you had like a technology recycle plan, if it has been in fruition for multiple years, the guidance at the time was you could carry it forward. The new guidance I've received is that wouldn't carry forward. With that said, when I budgeted the first round, I had already taken that into consideration because some of the things that I had read over the summer did state something different. So unless the only time that type of plan would move forward is if the actual operating budget was adopted. Because then technically they're agreeing to that plan to move forward. The one reason why I bring that up specifically is most schools have a 3 to 5 year technology replacement plan. So there is a specific plan in place to carry forward year after year. Some of the other things that were not included in the article, but I considered items of reconsideration, was liability insurance, co-curricular salaries, maintenance agreements in regards to like software. So we talk about that line in regards to, that's the line where the SAU helps out and does the bulk shopping. And then we disseminate out those deals to the districts, and you're charged only per your utilization for your school. That was one of the areas I looked at. And then contracted services, which would be like plowing, landscaping, things like that, which I would not consider at this point moving forward an item that would be in default. A lot of that has to do is a lot of those contracts are a 1-year contract, not a multi-year contract. But if we were in the middle of a multi-year contract and the operating budget moves forward, potentially it's arguable that it becomes.
What you're saying is we would have to use whatever money we have for plowing and maintenance would have to stay the same.
It would stay the same, even though you would need to pay a higher price. You would have to find somewhere in your budget in order to cover the expense. And then those are really the areas. So comparative to what I first put together, and I'll give you specifics, we'll go through specifics. The difference between the first time I created the default and the revision with the slightly different methodologies, the difference you're going to see in your bottom line is $18,600. Okay. On this sheet, if you look all the way over to the right, which is the purple section, I've given you what the differences are in all of the sections I've listed. And then I've also given you the line numbers that attribute to those within your budget. So if you go to line 38, which is on page 6, P6, at the very, very top, the special ed coordinator is one of the positions. You'll notice that the default, the default 24, the proposed, and the default 25 are all the same. The reason why those are all the same, that the proposed is exactly the same, is because that multi-year contract was coming to an end. So that's why the proposed lines up. You'll find in other sections, like if we go down to line 108, that will be slightly different. That's on page 13. That's the principal salary. You'll notice in the middle where the default column is for 24-25, which is your voted budget, you'll notice is 102. The proposed is 108. And then if you go to default, it goes back down to 102. Even though that position is in year 2 of a 3-year contract, it would not make it into the default because it was not an item that was prior approval that the community had approved. It was an increase that the school board had entered into after the fact.
And is it an increase from 102? It's an increase from this year's contract, which is
correct. So yes. And
Mhm.
so I say 108, but that really is 2 years of salary increase. Because when we budgeted for last year, it was the first year of the contract, but again, it was budgeted down below under the 2900s. But once it's a multi-year contract, it will then be year 2 would be budgeted in the actual line. So it's really this year's increase and next year's increase in that particular salary line. So it's not like getting a $6,000
Right.
increase in 1 year.
I wanted to
It really is 2 years.
Thank you, Amber.
Yes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so some of the other lines are line 57, which will be on page 7. This is your co-curriculars. This is your co-curricular officials. And you'll notice that the default was 17,190 and the default proposed is also 17,190. The actual proposed budget is lower. The reason why it's lower is because right now there might be some sports that aren't running, but that's not to say that the district doesn't need that or didn't want that, but they're just not running. So they shouldn't lose the funding just because they don't have enough students currently. Once they have enough students, they'll be able to run the program. So the money needs to be available for when that happens. Now, should their budget get approved and they get the 13,000, so they would have to budget more next year to try to cover that program. If you go up one more to co-curricular salaries, you'll notice the same. The voted default for this year is 42,000. The proposed budget is 39,000. The proposed default is 42,000. Same methodology there. We're just lowering it for the proposed because we know we're not going to have some programs run next year, but it doesn't mean they should lose the funding for it. It's the same thing. You can compare it to a position that on a roster that is an open position that hasn't been filled. Just because the position hasn't been filled or you're having trouble filling it doesn't mean you should lose that position in your roster. You would still get to carry that position to your default. The only time you wouldn't carry a position to your default is if you add a position. So you say, okay, I need one more 4th grade teacher. That additional FTE wouldn't make it. But if you had an open 4th grade position that was open already on your roster but just hadn't been filled, that would move forward. Does that make sense? Okay. If I'm going too fast, let me know. All right, let's see here. So on line 131, which is custodial salaries, same methodology there as principal, the principal salary. That is also a group of staff members that are not covered by a CBA. So when Patty brings to you during budget session and says, okay, these are the group of individuals that aren't covered by a CBA, would you still like to give them an increase? And typically it's, anywhere between 2 to 3% or so, plus a market adjustment if that needs to happen. Again, always budgeted in the 2,900s and then moved up. This particular area, along with food service, has received market adjustments over the last few years to help bring them in alignment with what the rest of society is happening. If you go down the street, or not down the street here, you go down the street from where I live, you go to a Wendy's, they are already making $15+ So we tried to bring those staff members up. So the school board has done that. With that said, those increases should not make it into a default budget because it was not what was prior voted.
Can I ask just a couple questions? So on line 64, nurse salary, that's going up. Why has that gone up?
That could go on up. Well, with one, it's CBA. And there's also additional days in there.
Oh, there is a nurse with CBA. So you're saying salary's going up, is that CBA, but the additional days are not, which would be.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. That's why there's,
All right.
for the proposed is 82,000, but the default's 80. I cannot include the 5 additional days.
Okay, I get it.
Now, should the district receive the proposed operating, then moving forward, those 5 additional days will carry from year to year.
Sure.
But because the public hasn't, our community has not voted that in at this point, it doesn't.
Okay. And then the other one I have a question about.
And that's something that that methodology has been going on for years. That is not a change.
Yeah, I couldn't get it from what it said.
And the point 2 is a 1-day nurse. Okay.
But we haven't added any additional. It's just the additional 5 days.
So it's the same thing for line 114, that's the network technician, so it's the same thing.
Correct.
It's a contractual raise, but not necessarily additional hours.
Correct,
Okay, all right.
correct. Yep. But we've always done that. There's 2 positions. It's usually the guidance and the nurse are typically get additional days for the districts. And if you end in a default, they keep losing those additional days. So they haven't made it into a budget in quite some time. Let's see here. I think I can probably, so really the substitute salary, which is line 3, which is going to be on page 2 of your budget. You'll notice, so 24-25, we budgeted 45,710. The proposed is 50,000. The proposed default would remain at 45,710. We would not get the extra funding there. The other salaries are pretty much the same. So then let's go down to line 136, which is electric. So really this next section is the utilities. And the guidance that I have received is that utilities are necessary in order to provide an adequate education. In order for, you cannot have your electricity shut off. You need to be able to pay it. As well as propane, oil, and so forth. One of the other things that makes it a little bit challenging with some of the utilities is that, like, for instance, oil, propane, contracts aren't July to June. They cross over the fiscal years. So they may end in like May or end in November or something like that. So it does roll from year to year. It's more on calendar year it tends to be, or even an off cycle, but not a fiscal year. So they do cross over. Ground maintenance, which is line 145 on page 17. The default voted was 55,500. We're proposing 63,500. The default would revert back to 55. All of those are really year-to-year contracts, so they would not make it through. Okay, line 33, I'm sorry, it's going back and forth. I probably should have put them in order for you. Line 33 on page 5, I believe it will be. Right in the very middle of the page, this is the computer network replacement. This is where I was talking about that computer recycle plan that all the districts have. You'll notice that the voted 24-25 was 60,612. The proposed is 60,000, and the proposed default is 60,000. The reason why it matches is because there were some items on that plan that wouldn't be purchased every year. The other thing is if your 5-year plan comes to an end, we wouldn't carry it forward, right? So because the things you're purchasing might be slightly different. So sometimes it will match your default, and sometimes it might be lower because of the one-time expense. Like maybe, I don't know what, maybe they needed cameras or something like that for a couple years, but all right, now we have the cameras on the 4th and 5th year, we don't need the camera. So we would take that. Mm-hmm. So that's why that one's a little bit slightly different. So those are pretty much the areas that were in the article. The areas that are down below that I said other areas to consider, I had already taken these into consideration. There's no changes in liability insurance. There was no changes in co-curricular salaries from the first draft you received. No changes in the maintenance agreements, which are the bulk shopping for your software. I had already taken that into consideration. And the contracted services, which are your plowing, mowing, that type of thing. I had already taken those into consideration. the first time. So you won't see any changes from the first round in those lines. But what I will say is I did not carry forward the increases, the proposed increases that we're proposing for next year in the operating budget. Those were not carried forward to the default. I just didn't need to make any changes because I had already taken them into consideration.
Can I just mention, we had multiple meetings all week, every night, and I apologize that I did not get this before our assistant left for the day, so I wasn't able to post it ahead of time, and we've been really trying to do that for the public, so I just wanted everybody to know why.
Yeah.
It was like 4:30 when Amber finished it, so I will get it posted tomorrow, if anyone else is looking for it. It wasn't intentional that we didn't
No.
get it up in advance.
So this version of the budget includes the
cut.
subtraction of 18,600.
It does. It does. I
From
went
the
through and made
prior.
those changes compared to the prior budget. Yep.
Other questions about the default?
What is that transfer to food service fund?
So the reason why that one is down there is because up above, you'll see like where in the middle section where it's co-curricular officials, the very bottom is food service salaries. So that would need to be modified. It actually would need to go up. And the reason for that being our proposed is 97,000 and the default is 99. It really needs to revert back to 99 because I will tell you that there was a roster miscalculation in the proposed, so the proposed will actually be short. So it does need to go up. The reason why it is listed below is because when you change something in the food service budget, it is a separate budget outside the operating. It affects a couple lines within the operating budget. There's a transfer, and then there's also a line at the very last or second to last line of your budget where it is the total food service program. So it affects both those lines. I would need to increase the transfer food service and the total of the food service program. So I just wanted to put it down below because it is technically outside the operating budget because those salaries aren't included. It's a totally separate budget. But because that program is not sustainable on its own, there is a operational piece that covers that budget to get it to break to zero. And you also have to budget total appropriations, which is why at the very end of the budget, you'll see grant expenditures and food service expenditures because you have to total appropriate. So you have to take your Fund 1, your grants, plus your food service to get your total appropriation. Okay.
All right. Other questions? Are we ready to move forward with approval? All right, I will go ahead and make a motion to approve the proposed default budget in the amount of $20,280,086. Any discussion?
Thank you for looking.
Oh, you're
Yeah,
welcome.
Appreciate
No, you're
the
welcome.
double checks.
And I will continue to review guidance as it comes through, and any changes, I will make sure to update you and moving forward.
Awesome. All right, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. Excellent. Draft warrant articles.
So I noticed today that, again, we're doing some training at the SAU office right now. We did change you had wanted to change, I think it was 2, 3, and 4 to be funded from surplus. So, but the missing sentence was this sum to come from the June 30th, 2025 unassigned fund balance available for transfer. That sentence is missing in the drive. So I added that, because that has to be there too. And then change from the last meeting, 2, 3, and 4, to these raised from surplus.
I did notice that 2, 3, and 4 are missing the words of the amount.
Oh, yep.
We have to spell
Oh,
out.
you mean spell out
10,000,
10,000, yes.
10,000, yeah. That's the numbers.
Have we, double checked the names of our trusts? Our trust, so Joanna doesn't have to come out and deliver.
I asked did that get done. I didn't review it to make sure it was correct, but I did ask that be reviewed. Okay, did you, Amber, did you double check?
Yes, I believe I did.
Okay, I asked for that to get done. So I
When do we need the final versions to be approved?
As soon as you take action, we can send it on to the NBC. I think the only outstanding article that we needed to talk about was the, you had brought up Stage Road at the last meeting.
Yep.
You wanna update the board on?
Yes. Stage
What we
Road,
learned
big
from
exciting
that
Stage
question.
Road fun. So yes, Patty had sent, an email to legal asking to draft a warrant. We would need more specific information about the we need appraisal
yeah.
of the property.
Yeah.
So I could try to get an appraisal in the next week or so. I don't think that's particularly likely. But, you know, if the board wanted to try to move forward with it this year, we could try to get an appraisal done on the property. So the way that the warrant article reads is, you know, that the school would have the authority to sell this property, assessed at X, and the proceeds will be placed in this trust fund.
You have to have an estimate of what the property is worth.
And that would be established in the trust fund also at the same time.
No, we were gonna put it in like the building one or renovations or whatever.
And then that takes away all our freedom to make any kind of deals with anybody. So.
Yeah.
Sort of, yes.
Yeah.
So that means it would be sold for market value is what that article would say. And if
That's
it's
what the town would
approved-
be approving.
It would be, well, it would, the draft language said, terms and conditions as it deems to be in the best interest of the district and further to appropriate up to the sum of. So you're gonna get as much as you can. You have to put an estimate on what the property is worth. And then if you ended up getting more than that, the extra would just come in as revenue offset.
But a question I had last time when this came up was, if we wanted to work with the Conservation Commission, let's just for example, to come up with some sort of another solution, that language in that article would preclude, that would not be a possibility. We would be forced, if it was approved, to sell it for market value.
Well, I don't think so. It says
Up to.
further to appropriate up to the sum of X from the net proceeds of the sale.
And if you were trying to sell it for less than that.
You could sell it, but you have to have an amount to say up to the sum of blank from the proceeds would go into the trust fund. So you have to have an amount there. But if you sold it for less, then that's the amount that would go in. If you sold it for more, the rest of it goes to revenue.
The dollar value listed within the warrant article would have to go to that fund.
The town has to approve how much money is going into a warrant article. Right, I mean, a trust fund.
So you could still name that.
You could.
That would still leave it open,
Yes.
except that we have to sell it and have to pay for monetary value. Couldn't give it away.
So could we sell it to the town for $1? I mean, that would be the point of what we're trying to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, someone could argue that it's not in the best interest of the district
Yeah, I would
to do that.
So I guess maybe then I would not argue for pushing ahead in a week to try to get this thing to go through. I would rather take a year till next March to touch base with the town and.
Right, you're not getting any public input.
Yeah, to do all this
You're just
without,
putting this on.
it seems like an
Yeah.
uninformed, spur of the moment decision. on-
I don't disagree. You know, it was a fleeting thought that I had.
I think it's a
So-
great idea, but if we had more flexibility after that
Correct.
vote, I would be in favor of that. I think if this sounds like we'd be locked into a little bit more so than with a particular kind of route, I think it's too early to commit to that.
I agree. I mean, it's possible people in town have a lot of thoughts about this and want to see it conserved or something.
Maybe we need to do a committee, set up a committee next year with people from planning board, conservation commission, energy committee, concerned citizens, whatever. And have a committee and look at what's the best use of it and then put something on.
Have a public forum like you did with high school to hear from people and have a dialogue.
Is it probably is too late for this, but then what about a slightly different wording for an article that would be more like a poll kind of a question? I know we don't like those so much, but like to get the most feedback, this is the time to get the most feedback from the town about selling it or conserving it.
I think you could do, I don't know that you would need a warrant article to make like an exploratory committee, but you could ask, like, should the school board create an exploratory committee to consider the sale or.
Is it the best use of this property for the community?
Yeah. No,
But you're
I know
asking
you
if
don't
the
need,
board should create
Yeah, I
a
don't think
committee.
we-
Right, I don't think
I don't
we
think we
need
even need to
Right.
do that.
that's not the line, that's not what I was talking
Yeah.
about.
Oh,
My
sorry.
idea is asking the town if they would like to sell it for profit or whatever, or conserve it.
But I think the problem with that though is that you don't really know what the conservative could be.
Sure.
So people are voting on something that they really don't know what it could be.
We also don't have an appraisal of the property. So if someone is saying, how much could we get for this? Could this pay for our unit ventilators? So that we don't have to pay for it, I agree. I think we should unfortunately probably wait and keep it on, I would like to sort of deal with it though.
I'd like to make that a goal for next year.
Yeah, and it was last
We
year.
talked about it, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think we actually put it on, but we talked about it, yeah, but I think this is the time to make it a goal. And then maybe handle it in the right way, because I agree with you, I'd rather have input from the community to really do a thoughtful thing with this piece and not just be
And it-
sure to sell it.
I also, I think that I've already heard comments that, oh, they're just gonna put a bunch of houses on it. And now we do have this study from the planning commission or whomever
It said it's not
that
affecting
says,
the
exactly how much it would impact the school population potentially. So we can share all of that information and have a more educated, discussion on it.
I noticed at the top, the date, in the wrong year.
On the warrant,
Yeah, 2024.
This hasn't been sent.
I was gonna say, I don't think voting day is on the date.
And it
Or
hasn't,
delivered, but I'm not sure.
it hasn't been sent, to legal.
Okay.
It's still draft. So I can send it if you're happy with the amounts, the edits that have been mentioned, I can send it up to you.
And is it in the order you want funded to?
Yes, very good. Yes. Okay, I captured everything. Has been decided.
Kind of a boring warrant this year.
Sometimes that's a good thing.
Okay. We only have 4, so a board member doesn't even have to present one. Someone gets a free pass. Wow.
Drawing straws?
Yeah. Wow. All right. Any other comments, or is everyone fine to make the edits as discussed and send to legal?
And then we'll have hopefully the final draft for you at your next meeting to vote on it. We can do it. And they can certainly have the draft.
I was saying, should we send them a draft?
They can have the draft for sure. Okay. Just so they can see what articles you're considering.
Cool. All right. We need a motion.
And unless you want to add, I mean, I can add in the numbers and we can vote on the articles now. It's up to you, like for the first one. We can do them all.
I would say.
You've already voted on your budget, so it's just more of a formality to vote on the warrant, on the article itself. She votes on them. all the-
We can do.
Yeah, okay. Minimum, whatever your day is.
The next meeting?
Date, am I right?
Not New Year's Eve or New Year's.
Unfortunately, no, we're not spending New Year's Day together.
It's like,
Are there any informational items?
Nope.
Okay.
I think that's something, a lot of people in the public came and talked about this, and I have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. I'm kind of concerned too that I'm a school board member and I don't know what the incident is that they're talking about. I don't really do social media, and from what I heard, I shouldn't be getting it from social media, so I guess that's just.
There was,
Are
I
they
sent the
not-
letter,
Are they not on the?
to school board.
One call now?
they're on one call now.
I did not get
Got
it.
an email?
I didn't get any.
Right, so I'm gonna have to check and see whether or not getting one call messages. It should have gone to you.
I had gotten a message about the late opening or something, but I didn't get anything about this.
Okay, we'll forward it to you then, both emails.
I didn't get one either.
Okay.
I did, but I have a kid here.
Yeah, that is, for some reason you should have.
No, I sent it one call now.
Okay, we'll forward those to you.
Okay. We are then back to public comments.
Kevin Burtle on the Karen Road. It's interesting to follow along the board and you guys see standardized test data presented because a lot of times people poo-poo standardized tests is not telling us anything, snapshot in time. And then we look and we're giving an awful lot of standardized tests and putting a lot of stock into it in this school. And I find that duality very, very interesting that some people say, well, don't look at this, but yet we're looking at it. And it sounds like we're looking at it for placement of students, et cetera. And so I think it's something board members really need to give some thought to as to what you think those tests really are, what they're doing, what they're providing to students. Because other than the SAS, none of them are mandatory. Right? You don't have to give kids standardized tests if you don't want it. If you want to go back to old school schooling. That's not really why I stuck around all night. I stuck around all night because I've been saying it and other people have been saying it. A couple of years ago, there's some real animosity between the board and large swaths of the public. And then we got a lot of new members on. And for a year or two, it seemed like it was going in the right direction and things were moving along in a good way, right? To bring unity back to the community. And I think we're slipping back rapidly to what was causing people a lot of consternation just a few short years ago. And it doesn't matter to me. You have a difference of opinion, right? The challenge is it's your credibility, right? That when you say things that demonstrably they will be proven to be incorrect and you dig in your heels, it goes to character. It goes to the trustability. And then and so if you lose that trust, it's any of that trust, right? Especially if you're losing it a little bit at a time. Then when something goes on, something nobody expected, if people are already distrustful and wary about their governing board over their local public school and what's going on, that compound, I used to have a saying, discipline in the classroom is like a helium balloon, right? So long as you hold on to it, you're okay. But if you let it go, if you lose control of your class, it's almost impossible to get it back, right? It's really, really hard. And it's the same thing with our credibility. So we need to be very careful what words we use, how we express things, to make sure that our remarks are factually accurate, factually correct, and to the point. Because when they're not, and people can call things into question, then we lose credibility. We lose respect to the public. And it is of critical importance. especially for the public school system. Because unless you can afford to send your kid somewhere else, by law, you have to send your kid here 180 days a year, whether you like it or not. That's the option, right? It's mandatory public school. And so this should be the most transparent, the most easy to work with, the most clear board, any elected board or committee anywhere, because it's the public school and it's what people are sending their kids. And so I just really ask that you go home and just take a fresh look at it, think about it, because we need a school board that people believe they can come to and be heard, that they can come to and get answers, and that they believe that they're being told the cold, honest truth straight down the middle. And that's really important. And if we don't do that, then we have all kinds of trouble. I appreciate the extra time. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah.
Thank you. Other public comments?
We will not public comment, would you like to, since the board didn't receive that?
Sure.
One call out.
Which letter? C. Okay, I will make another motion to go into non-public session pursuant to NHRSA 91-A:3, section 2, small letter C.
Second.
Roll call.
Yes.
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 Yes.